In last few months of Donald Trump's presidency, the world stood at the edge of an economic precipice. The man who once branded himself the Tariff Man had returned to his most controversial weapon, trade tariffs. And this time, the impact wasn't just domestic, it was global. Tariffs, those seemingly simple taxes on imported goods, became Trump's economic sledgehammer. With a signature on a document in the White House, billions of dollars of goods became more expensive overnight. China, Europe, Canada, even allies like Japan and South Korea, none were spared. But why now, and why so aggressively? Let's rewind. Trump's economic worldview was always transactional. He saw international trade not as a web of mutual benefit but as a zero-sum game. If America was buying more than it was selling, then America was losing. And in his eyes, the main culprit? China. But it didn't stop there. Trump's team, particularly his economic advisors, were obsessed with decoupling, separating the U.S. economy from its reliance on Chinese manufacturing. The goal? Make America produce again. The method? Slap tariffs on everything from steel to semiconductors. In early 2025, with campaign season heating up and pressure mounting from his base, Trump made his boldest move yet. Massive tariff hikes on over 3,000 product categories, targeting countries deemed to have unfair trade practices. And just like that, a new trade war ignited. Markets trembled, economists warned of a coming shockwave, but many dismissed it as political theater, until the consequences hit home. Within weeks, American consumers began to feel the pinch. Electronics, cars, clothing, even food, all became more expensive. Inflation, which had finally cooled after years of central bank effort, began to tick upward again. The Federal Reserve, already walking a tightrope, was forced to reconsider its rate-cut timeline. Middle-class families, already stretched thin, found themselves paying hundreds more each month. And what about American manufacturers? Many of them relied on global supply chains, especially parts from Asia and Europe. Now they were caught in the crossfire, paying more for inputs, delaying production, and laying off workers. The America First policy began to look more like America alone. The global response was swift. China retaliated with tariffs of its own, targeting American agriculture, soybeans, corn, pork. European allies responded with legal action in the World Trade Organization and prepared countermeasures. Emerging markets dependent on exports to the United States saw their currencies nosedive and investment capital flee overnight. In South Korea and Taiwan, tech giants warned of a slowdown. In Germany, auto manufacturers braced for job losses. Even in Canada, which had once negotiated a delicate trade pact with Trump, panic spread through the lumber and dairy industries. What began as a unilateral decision in Washington triggered a domino effect worldwide. Global shipping slowed, rerouted to avoid tariff-heavy ports. Consumer sentiment dropped in Europe. In Asia, recession fears began to resurface. The International Monetary Fund downgraded global growth projections within a month, and then came the tipping point, the oil shock. Still, Trump defended his policy. He argued that short-term pain would lead to long-term independence, that tariffs would force companies to return manufacturing to American soil, that it was the only way to break the cycle of foreign dependence. But there was a problem. No one was ready. U.S. factories, hollowed out over decades, couldn't scale up quickly enough. Infrastructure, especially in semiconductor production and rare earths, simply didn't exist. And when companies tried to shift production to Vietnam, India, or Mexico, they found unstable logistics, regulatory bottlenecks, and, ironically, rising wages. Instead of boosting domestic production, tariffs became a tax on American life. And worse, small businesses, the backbone of the economy, were crushed. Without the leverage or scale to absorb costs, many closed their doors. Entire communities lost jobs. Rural America, which had overwhelmingly voted for Trump, began to feel betrayed. Then came the political fallout. Democrats seized the moment, labeling Trump's trade policy as reckless and elitist. Even traditional Republican allies in the Chamber of Commerce and Wall Street began to turn. The stock market plunged, wiping out gains from the previous 2 years. Trump's approval ratings dipped. Protest movements emerged, not just against inflation, but against the broader economic nationalism that had failed to deliver results. In Congress, lawmakers debated emergency stimulus to cushion the damage, but partisan gridlock stalled action. Meanwhile, the Fed was stuck raise rates to fight inflation, or cut rates to fight recession. They did neither. and uncertainty reigned. Globally, the US was now seen as an unreliable partner. New trade alliances began to form, without American involvement. The EU and China signed a surprise agreement to stabilize their trade. The BRICS bloc announced a new currency framework to reduce dependence on the US dollar. Even Canada and Mexico began talks with Asian economies to reduce reliance on US trade routes. The post-American trade order had begun to take shape. And perhaps that was the most lasting consequence. Trump's tariffs didn't just hurt short-term growth, they fractured the delicate system of globalization that had powered decades of relative prosperity. For better or worse, the world began to move on. America had once led the world economy with vision, partnership, and innovation. Now, it stood more isolated than ever. Not because it lacked power, but because it had weaponized that power recklessly. Tariffs, meant to make America strong, instead revealed how vulnerable the modern economy truly is. Interconnected, fragile, and unforgiving. This was not just an economic policy, it was a global turning point, and the world may never be the same again. Please like and subscribe to our channel for more insightful content on global trade and economics.